May 2nd, 1982. A grainy tape rolls. String lights shake over a crowded floor. A banner reads, Willow Creek PROM, 82. Music is loud, then softer as the camera loses focus. A girl with a crown laughs, waves, and slips out of frame. Vanessa Cole steps away from the dance and into the last minutes anyone can place with certainty. Willow Creek sits quiet around the hall, a small Pennsylvania town with maple-lined streets and a curfew of habit more than law. The building glows like a lighthouse in a calm bay. Beyond the doors, the lot behind it is darker and thinly lit. The night is still. Engines come and go in the distance. Inside, the song changes. At 12:10 a.m., Vanessa pushes the rear door open. She tells a friend she's stepping out to call her mom. The camera catches the door edge and a wash of yellow light on concrete. Then nothing. She moves into the rear lot. The security camera above the door should have seen her cross the view, but its archive is corrupt, the tape damaged before anyone thought to pull it. Her light blue 1979 Pontiac sits where she parked it hours earlier. It never moves. The car is locked. Her purse, with a little cash, remains in the glove box. No alarm. No shattered glass. The sodium lamp in the far corner flickers on and off, cutting the lot into bright and dark. A metal railing runs along the edge by the dock to the lower drive. On that railing, later, a single brown hair will matter. For now, it's just one more thing no one notices. 12:15, last confirmed sighting. A couple of students step out for air and walk back in. They will later remember a figure near the back corner but won't agree on the height, the jacket, or whether that figure faced the building or the road. The lot looks ordinary. The night sounds are ordinary. The danger, if it's there, doesn't announce itself. From 12:20 to 12:40 the music slows. Groups peel off for rides. No one sees the Pontiac leave. No one sees Vanessa return. The hallway phone inside the main lobby. At 1:25, a call goes to the Willow Creek police. Missing person. Last seen at the rear lot of the hall around 12:15 a.m. The dispatcher writes it down. No immediate signs of struggle. Vehicle locked. Personal items in the glove box. Rear entrance camera. Archive corrupted. It's a checklist that reads clean but feels wrong. A short walk has become a blank space. The difference between a safe night and a cold case is 12 minutes and a dark corner. Freeze the picture where the railing cuts the frame. Hold on the lot, the parked cars, the sodium lamp with its nervous pulse. Think about sequence, not rumor. She left a crowded room. She walked outside to make a call. In that gap, the routine broke. That is where every answer must live. We will build this story from what can be measured. Timestamps, a car that never moved, a door that opened and closed, a missing set of keys, a damaged tape, a hair on a rail. Every line will return to those points until they add up. The goal is not to guess. The goal is to map. Before we ask where she went, we need to know who she was. That context keeps the frame steady when the timeline turns. In the next part, we go back to Willow Creek in 1982 and meet Vanessa as her town saw her. A face in every yearbook, a voice on the school radio, a daughter who called home when she stayed out late. Then we'll move minute by minute through her final hours and test each detail against the record. If you were at Willow Creek PROM 82, or lived nearby in the early 80s, add what you remember in the comments. Dates, names, photos, ticket stubs, journal pages, anything that can be verified. Start your note with info so we can find it. Share this with anyone who danced in that hall or stood under those lights. Sometimes the smallest memory becomes the start of a discovery. Before she vanished, she was everywhere. In photos, in hallways, in people's memories. Vanessa Cole wasn't just another face at Willow Creek High. She was the girl people expected to see. Her room stayed neat. Photos on the wall, a radio always humming, a calendar marked with reminders, study group, shift at the florist, call mom. She was careful about her schedule. Every night she called her dad if she was running late. It wasn't his rule, it was hers. At school she was known as the prom queen who stayed kind. Not the kind that looked down on people, the kind that helped the theater crew tape down lights, or showed up early to test microphones before assemblies. Teachers called her the glue, reliable, polite, easy to work with. She didn't come from money, but she never let it show. Her friends came from every group, cheerleaders, band members, the quiet ones from yearbook club. She made them all feel part of something. The school paper once wrote, "Vanessa Cole keeps the lights on in every hallway she walks through." That same line would be carved into her memorial bench 40 years later. By 1982, she'd moved on to a nearby community college, but still worked part-time at Willow Creek Florist on Main Street. Her co-workers remembered her handwriting, perfect cursive, looping, always signed V. Every Friday, she delivered bouquets to the nursing home before heading home for dinner with her dad. The week before prom, she'd helped design the flower arrangements for the same event she'd end up attending. She joked that she could name every corsage in town. She loved radio more than anything. At school, she ran the morning broadcast, Wake Up Willow, a 5-minute show before first period. She introduced local bands, read birthdays, and ended each broadcast the same way. Stay kind, stay curious. Friends said she was always early, never late. She set 2 alarms. She didn't drink, she didn't smoke. She liked the color light blue. Her car, her sweater, even her notebooks matched. People remembered how she noticed small things. Fixing a crooked banner, straightening a teacher's stack of tests before leaving the room. That kind of order made her disappearance later feel impossible. One friend put it simply, she didn't just vanish. Something happened to her routine. In the months before prom, she'd ended a 2-year relationship with Jake Mallory, a local mechanic. In 1982, Willow Creek was the kind of town people called safe. Main Street closed at 9. Parents left their doors unlocked. Teenagers walked home under streetlights that hummed instead of buzzed. Bad news always came from somewhere else. Vanessa was a symbol of that safety, polite, bright, predictable. When she went missing, it wasn't just a tragedy. It felt like the town itself had lost its balance. The morning after the prom, her father woke to an empty kitchen. Her car wasn't in the driveway. The call she always made never came. On the table sat her textbooks and a plate of toast she hadn't touched. When reporters asked if she might have run away, Frank said, "She was supposed to be home at 12:30. That one sentence shifted the tone of the entire case. For weeks, her room stayed the same, the radio silent. Corsage flowers dried and crumbled on the dresser. Neighbors stopped by to check in, then stopped altogether when they realized there was nothing to say. The search crews thinned out. The posters faded in the rain. But her absence stayed heavy. In grocery lines, at gas stations, in quiet moments when someone saw a blue car and froze. In a small town, time doesn't heal a mystery. It preserves it. Every girl who danced that night remembered exactly what Vanessa wore, who she spoke to, how she smiled when she waved goodbye. Every parent remembered the morning they heard the news. Every street corner still held a rumor. The local paper summed it up. A face everyone knew, and a silence no one could explain. For years, that silence grew louder than the music that played in the hall that night. Vanessa's story didn't end at the parking lot. It lingered, in the unanswered phone call, the car that never moved, and the town that refused to forget. Her yearbook quote comes back again. Always leave a little light behind. She did, and that faint light would guide investigators, journalists, and even strangers for more than 40 years, until the truth finally caught up. May 2nd, 1982, Willow Creek, Pennsylvania. By sunset, the air felt. By 9:15, she'd switched from heels to flats, dancing under the mirror ball while a local band played their last set. Around 10:40, several students saw her step out into the hallway and exchange a few tense words with her ex-boyfriend, Jake Mallory. No shouting, but witnesses remembered the tone. Quick, defensive, quiet enough to fade when the next song started. After that, she went back inside, calm, polite, smiling again. At 11:30, she used the payphone in the main lobby. The call lasted less than a minute. Phone logs confirmed the time, but the number dialed was never traced. Investigators later found the line connected to an unlisted exchange, and whatever she said that night was lost to static. Close to midnight, the crowd began to thin. Vanessa gathered her bag, thanked the event staff, and told her friends she was stepping outside to get some air and call her mom. That was around 12:05 a.m. She slipped her jacket over her shoulders and walked toward the rear door, the one marked staff access only. At 12:10, she was seen on the security camera exiting through the metal door into the parking lot. The tape from that night was later recovered, but most of it was damaged from improper storage. Only a few seconds survived, enough to show her figure moving past the doorway into the dim light. The last confirmed sighting came at 12:15. A student leaving the restroom window saw her near the rear railing facing the lot, possibly on the phone again. That small detail would become the fixed point investigators returned to again and again. The last place anyone could place her. From 12:20 to 12:40, there was nothing. Her car never moved. The keys were gone. Her purse sat locked in the glove box with a few bills inside. No signs of a struggle. No shouts. No calls for help. Just the low hum of the street lamp and a patch of shadow that no one remembered noticing until later. By 12:45, the music inside slowed. At 12:55, the lights went up, and students began to drift home. At 1:10, someone realized. In the next part, the focus shifts from minutes to people. 3 men whose names became the center of suspicion, rumor, and fear. Jake Mallory, Pastor Alan Riggs, Eddie Kramer. All 3 had motives. None had proof. And for 40 years, the truth stayed hidden between their stories. By sunrise on May 3rd, 1982, the laughter from prom night had turned into whispers. Police cars lined the narrow road outside Willow Creek Hall. Yellow tape fluttered across the rear parking lot, the same lot where, just hours earlier, music had echoed through open doors and kids had danced under paper streamers. Sheriff Harold Lawson arrived at 7:03 a.m. His first written report was brief. Vehicle locked, no signs of struggle. Keys missing. The Pontiac sat exactly where Vanessa had parked it. Rear corner, west fence. Her purse was in the glove box. A few dollar bills inside. Lipstick. Combination. Ticket stub. Nothing stolen. The officers walked the lot twice, boots crunching over gravel still damp from the night air. No footprints stood out. No tire marks suggested another car. It was the kind of clean, open space that made everything harder to explain. By noon, the missing person report had shifted to something heavier. The sheriff's office stopped calling it a search. The case became a criminal inquiry. By the end of the first 24 hours, Willow Creek had already decided who was guilty. They just hadn't agreed on which person. 3 stories spread through town faster than the police could confirm a single one. The first was the ex-boyfriend theory. A fight, jealousy, revenge. The simplest version and the most dramatic. The second was the preacher theory. A moral dispute that turned ugly, the kind that made people lower their voices at church. And the third, the only one that made sense to outsiders, was the stranger theory. A drifter on Route 9, someone passing through. That story died before it ever had a chance. By the next morning, the local papers sealed the town's direction with one headline: Prom Queen's ex questioned in disappearance. It wasn't, "You think you're better than me now?" he said. "Don't do this," she answered. "Everyone knows why you're really here. To show off." "Please leave," she said again. "It's over." A teacher on duty, Mrs. Harland, saw them. She said it was short but heated. "He looked angry enough to spit nails," she told investigators later. When detectives questioned Jake the next day, he didn't deny being there. "I just wanted to talk," he said. "I didn't even touch her." He claimed he left the hall before midnight, drove to his friend Chris Dalton's house, and stayed there until about 1. Chris and another friend backed him up, but the restaurant receipt they gave police had a timestamp that didn't line up. It said 12:43 a.m., not 12:15. Jake said the receipt must have printed late. The sheriff called it unreliable corroboration. Jake's record wasn't clean, but it wasn't criminal either. 1 bar fight, no charges. The sheriff's private note, later declassified, said, "Motive plausible, timeline uncertain." That didn't matter to the town. Within days, Jake's name was everywhere. Posters that once asked, "Where is Vanessa?" might as well have said, "What did Jake do?" Reporters from Philadelphia filmed outside his house. His mother told a neighbor, "Every time I look out the window, I see someone pointing." Jake tried to keep working, but the auto shop lost business. Customers stopped coming. Within 3 months, he was gone. The second man under scrutiny wore a collar, not grease-stained hands. Pastor Alan Riggs, age 50, lived at 5 Church Lane, next door to the small white chapel where half the town went every Sunday. Riggs was respected, but feared in equal measure. His sermons were long, sharp, and often personal. He'd once used Vanessa as an example of youth distracted by vanity. She'd rolled her eyes in the third pew. In April, just weeks before the prom, she organized a student concert for the town fundraiser. Pop songs, not hymns. Riggs tried to cancel it. "That kind of music doesn't serve God," he said in a meeting with her. She reportedly replied, "Then maybe God doesn't need a microphone." People remembered that line, especially after she vanished. On May 3rd, at 12:45 p.m., Riggs was brought in for questioning. He didn't flinch. He told detectives he'd been at home that night, writing his sermon for the next morning. His wife confirmed it. No one else did. When asked about his relationship with Vanessa, he said, "I spoke to her about morals, not sin." But a parishioner, Helen Price, later told police she'd overheard Riggs arguing with Vanessa the week before the prom in the church parking lot. She called him controlling, Helen said. He told her she was tempting people away from faith. It got loud. The police noted possible fixation. Nothing more. The town split right down the middle. Some saw him as a victim of gossip. Others believed he'd gone too far long before that night. In his Sunday sermon that week, he looked out over a tense congregation and said, "I stand innocent before God. The guilty will answer in time." It only made things worse. The third suspect wasn't tied to Vanessa personally, but he was the closest physically. Eddie Kramer, 34, ran the parking lot behind Willow Creek Hall. He was hired for big events, carnivals, church fairs, high school dances. He had a reputation that followed him: 2 bar fights, 1 restraining order that never stuck, and a temper that came and went like summer storms. He lived in a trailer off Route 9, not far from the river. When detectives found him, he was half asleep, still wearing his uniform jacket. "I didn't see nothing," he said. "I stepped out for a smoke around midnight, maybe 12:20. I heard a car door slam, that's all." That was the exact time Vanessa disappeared. Eddie's logbook, the one he used to mark when he checked the gates, had a torn page between 12:10 and 12:30. He said the wind ripped it when he dropped the notebook. The sheriff marked it inconclusive. People in town didn't need proof. Eddie had always been an easy villain. By Thursday, someone had spray-painted, "Where were you at midnight, Eddie?" on the back wall of the lot. The graffiti was gone the next day, but the message stayed. He lost his job within 2 weeks. His landlord raised the rent. And though he was never charged, he lived under suspicion for the next 40 years. By May 5th, the sheriff's office was collapsing under pressure. Rumors filled every corner of Willow Creek, from the high school cafeteria to the bar on Main Street. At the local diner, people whispered over coffee. At church, Pastor Riggs used the pulpit to declare innocence. Jake's family received threats in the mail. Eddie avoided town altogether. An internal memo dated May 8th read, "Public expectation high. Need arrest soon." But they didn't have a body. They didn't have blood. They barely had evidence. What they had was pressure, and pressure broke the case before it even began. The sheriff focused almost entirely on personal motives. He ignored the few scattered reports of an unfamiliar maintenance worker seen near the rear lot that night. A man no one recognized, wearing a county uniform that didn't exist on file. The scene logs were inconsistent. Some evidence was bagged, others simply noted. Cigarette butts, a half footprint, a few smudged handprints on the railing. All collected, none tested. In one of his later notes, Lawson wrote, "One missing set of gate keys possibly misplaced by staff." Those keys were never found. They would later be traced back to the same storage area Hank Monroe worked in. But that was decades away. By the third day, the rear lot wasn't searched again. Officers moved on, convinced Vanessa's disappearance was the result of a personal dispute gone wrong. By June, the investigation slowed to a crawl. Leads went cold. Witnesses stopped returning calls. What was once a community united around fear became divided by accusation. The local paper, the Monroe County Ledger, ran updates almost daily, but facts quickly turned into filler. Students organized a "Where is Vanessa" poster campaign, stapling her picture to telephone poles across town. National TV crews arrived from Philadelphia, standing in the rain outside Jake's house, calling through his front door for comment. At the next town meeting, the mayor demanded progress. The sheriff promised closure soon. He didn't believe it. By summer, reporters had left, but the damage stayed. Jake Mallory moved to. By July, the crowd stopped showing up to vigils. The posters curled on the telephone poles. Vanessa's father closed the blinds at 204 Maple Drive. The town tried to move on, but couldn't. Everyone still saw her face, in the newspaper, on the yearbook cover, in their minds. But now it came with 3 other faces beside it. Jake, Rigzetti. The investigation had created its own ghosts, none of them guilty, all of them punished. The final report for 1982 ended with one sentence: case remains open. Further action pending new evidence. There wouldn't be any for decades. 3 suspects, 3 lives ruined, and the real man, the one who walked past Vanessa in that dark parking lot, was never even questioned. The sealed envelopes from that night still sit in their boxes. Everything is there, except the answer. We mapped the scene again, minute by minute. The rear entrance door where she stepped out at 0010. The metal railing in the back lot where she was last seen at 0015. Her light blue Pontiac in its slot, locked, purse still inside the glove box, keys missing. The Route 9 gate where the attendant's log is torn across the exact window we need. And the wall phone in the hall, the one that shows a short call around 11:30 p.m. to a number no one can read anymore. First, the rear door camera. The town had one. It should have been our eyes. It wasn't. The tape was copied the old way, then copied again, then stored badly. Moisture, magnet damage, and time did the rest. What's left are a few cloudy frames and no clear face. The only thing worse than silence is static that promises a picture and gives you none. The one feed that could have shown 0010 lost almost all value before the week was out. Then the hair on the railing. It was found the next morning, stuck near the last confirmed spot. Collected in a paper bag, then later moved to plastic because that was common practice. In 1982, that seemed fine. In 2023, back inside that wall phone. The log is smudged but shows a short call around 11:30 p.m. That is a pinned moment, an anchor before she went out. The number wasn't retrieved in time from the phone company, and those records didn't live long. The call confirms she was still moving through her plan. It does not tell us who heard her voice. The lot attendant's notebook should have helped. Pages record patrols and checks, except for the one missing slice from 0010 to 0030. He said the wind tore it after he dropped it. The book was turned in a day and a half later, creased, damp, ink blurred, enough to inflame the town, not enough to stand up as proof of anything. Witnesses agree on the scene at 0015, Vanessa near the railing, sodium lights flickering, music and a vent fan throwing sound into the lot. One person recalls a car door, another doesn't. One says she had her jacket in hand, another says her hands were free. We get a place and a time, and almost nothing reliable about the seconds that followed. This is where the 80s matter. No DNA profiling. Blood types, fibers, a microscope, a UV lamp. evidence rooms without climate control, tapes that mold, copies of copies that die in a drawer. The physical world isn't quiet. It's just quieter than what we can hear without the right tools. In this case, the tools came decades too late. Procedure broke down in ordinary ways. The back lot wasn't sealed right away. People moved through it. Surfaces were cleaned. Latent prints and contact traces that might have told us a story were wiped by schedule, not by intent. Interviews blurred because kids compared notes before statements were taken. The town focused on love, jealousy, and anger. Few eyes turned to the category that would matter later. People who could move freely behind the building. People who managed keys, gates, and lights. Now set those objects against the three names that carried blame. Jake had a hallway argument hours earlier and a shaky alibi. But nothing from the scene tied him to 0050. By 1984, there were no new leads. The small samples had degraded. Witness memories had cooled and shifted. The district attorney said there was no path to trial. The file went cold and joined a shelf of unanswerable questions. We look back at what almost helped. If the hair had been dried and sealed properly from minute one, maybe a profile would have survived intact. If the tape had been cloned to a clean master that week, maybe a face would exist today. If key control had been audited that night, maybe the idea of insider access would have risen sooner. If a swab had lifted contact from the railing while the surface was fresh, maybe we would have mixed DNA instead of one fragile strand. The cost lasted. Public trust thinned. 3 men were marked for years by rumor, not proof. The Cole house stayed the same because no one knew how to change it. Officers who were good people lived with a case that made them look careless. So we are left with a few hard questions. Whose hair sat on that railing? Who had the missing gate key? Who was the unfamiliar maintenance worker in the rear lot? And what exactly happened between 0010 and 0020 in the quiet behind the hall? The evidence didn't vanish. It waited. And when science finally caught up, a small numbered envelope from that shelf would open and speak. Rumors don't die in small towns. They just change owners. For 40 years, everyone in Willow Creek told the same story in their own way, a story without an ending. By 1984, the headlines were thinning out. The missing posters faded. The town moved on, and the case was officially transferred to the county's cold case unit. The box was sealed, marked, and stored on a metal shelf. Inside it, the VHS tape, a torn logbook, a few photos, and one small envelope labeled hair sample, rear railing. Frank Cole stayed in the same white house on Maple Drive. He kept Vanessa's room untouched. Every anniversary, he wrote a letter to her and folded it into a drawer by her radio. He stopped knocking on doors after a while, but he never changed. By the 90s, the storage room moved twice. Boxes were restacked, some documents digitized, others left behind. Someone wrote a small note on a yellow tag. Tape degraded. Recommend digital salvage. Budget pending. It stayed there for 20 years. By the 2000s, Vanessa's name lived online. Message boards, local forums, letters to the editor. The story turned into memory mixed with opinion. One retired teacher said, "She never missed curfew." That's why it never sat right with me. But stories like that blurred the facts even more. In 2013, a Facebook group appeared. Willow Creek Remembers Vanessa. Old classmates posted prom photos and scanned ticket stubs. A few tried to build a community map, marking where she parked, where she was last seen, where the lights flickered. One post read, "I heard a car door slam around 12:18. It was marked unverified, but it spread fast anyway." The county noticed the attention. By 2019, the district ordered a small evidence audit. Dozens of old cases were reviewed, but only one item from Willow Creek was flagged for future testing. That same hair sample from the rear railing. The note beside it read, "Condition fair. Retest recommended if technology allows." Frank Cole was now an old man. He petitioned to have parts of the case file released to the public. He also created a small Vanessa fund to keep her story alive. Every May, the church held a quiet vigil. People prayed for truth, not for closure. At the 2019 memorial, Eddie showed up for the first time in decades. He stood far from the candles, said nothing, and left before anyone spoke to him. Then, something changed. In 2020, a regional podcast called Forgotten Pennsylvania ran an episode about Vanessa's disappearance. The story went viral. By spring 2023, a petition called Retest the Hair gained thousands of signatures. The county finally approved a modest grant for forensic genetic genealogy, the new science of tracing DNA through family trees. By the time that envelope opened in the lab, the story of Willow Creek was ready to break. Because sometimes justice doesn't die. It just waits for the right decade to speak. 41 years after the night she vanished, the box was opened. The cardboard was soft with age, its edges yellowed like paper left in sunlight. Inside, a small envelope sat between brittle evidence reports and fading photographs. On its front, in blue pen almost erased by time, someone had written, "Hair, rear railing, 1982. That strand of hair had survived 4 decades, 2 floods, and 3 evidence transfers. It was one of the few things left from the night Vanessa Cole disappeared, and for 41 years it meant nothing. Until 2023. That year, the county finally joined a state partnership for forensic genealogy, a program that used family DNA trees to solve cold cases. Most of their breakthroughs came from violent crimes in big cities. No one expected much from a tiny file labeled Willow Creek, Missing Person, 1982. But it was next on the list. The envelope was unsealed under bright lab light. The hair was lifted with static-free tweezers almost too delicate to touch. Each fragment was photographed, measured, and entered into a digital chain of custody. Technicians used modern reagents to extract whatever DNA still clung to the strand. For a while it looked hopeless, degraded, partial, incomplete. Then, under a clean hood, a faint signal appeared on the monitor. It was enough. The data went into 2 systems: the state's DNA index and a public genealogy database. The goal wasn't to find the killer directly. It was to find someone related to him. Weeks passed. Then one day the match appeared, a distant cousin from northern Pennsylvania. A genealogist followed the trail backward, branch by branch, generation by generation. The tree split in 1938, the birth year of a man named Henry Monroe. The name was familiar to no one. Henry, or Hank. Investigators started digging through old county archives. They found Monroe's personnel files from the early 80s. Routine, unremarkable. No arrests, no convictions. But inside those files were handwritten complaints. Women describing uncomfortable comments, unwanted touching, boundary issues. Every report ended the same way. No action taken. He worked the night shift for 3 decades. He retired quietly in 2005 and died of lung cancer in 2016. No one at Willow Creek remembered him. After the genealogical link was confirmed, the lab needed proof. A judge granted permission to test a preserved tissue sample from Monroe's autopsy, kept in a medical storage bank. The sample was compared to the DNA extracted from Vanessa's hair. When the lab results came in, the lead examiner called the sheriff directly. Probability of match, 99.98%. The margin of error was less than 1 in a billion. The hair on the railing behind Willow Creek Hall belonged to Henry Hank Monroe. The team ran the test twice, same result. It was him. For 41 years, the wrong names carried the weight of guilt. Jake Mallory, Vanessa's ex-boyfriend, who left town after years of whispers. Pastor Riggs, accused in rumor but never in fact. Eddie Kramer, the parking lot owner whose torn logbook made him the town's villain. All 3 were innocent. And the real suspect, the night guard who patrolled that same lot, had died a free man. Monroe's shift records were reconstructed from the old security company's archive. On May 2nd, 1982, he clocked in at 7:54 p.m. His duty sheet listed rear gate, side lot, generator check. From midnight to 12:30, he was assigned lot patrol. That was the window when Vanessa was last seen alive. The flickering lights that everyone remembered weren't a coincidence. The generator reset every 30 minutes, a manual process handled by the night guard. It explained why the camera near the rear door lost power at 12:10, why the footage from that moment was missing, and why the person seen standing near Vanessa could never be identified. The light cut out seconds later. In July 2023, investigators located Monroe's only surviving family, a niece in Pittsburgh. She turned over a small metal box found in his attic after he died. Inside were several old security badges, a few folded notes, and a stack of Polaroids. They showed empty parking lots, church doors, and distant shots of young women under streetlights. None of them illegal, all of them uncomfortable. One note was written in blue ink. Gate duty, 0000. Girl with crown. Be polite. The handwriting matched Monroe's 1982 timesheets. Girl with crown. Vanessa Cole. Crowned prom queen less than an hour before she vanished. The sheriff's department rechecked every document. No other suspect had access to the locked lot that night. Only Monroe did. The DNA on the railing, the timesheet, the patrol area, all aligned perfectly. Everything else fell away. In October 2023, the county announced the official conclusion. Case status, solved. Offender deceased. The report cited Monroe's verified DNA match, employment records, and historical evidence trail. It also formally cleared all 3 former suspects of any involvement. The town that had divided itself for decades fell silent. Families who'd whispered for years finally had a name to replace their doubt, a name that had never once been spoken during the original investigation. Reporters called it the dead man's confession. One headline read, "Prom Night Mystery Solved. Guard Identified After 41 Years." Beneath it, Sheriff Ellison's statement, "Science did what time could not." It remembered. For the Cole family, it wasn't closure, but it was truth. For Jake, it was freedom after 40 years of being stared at in grocery aisles. For the town, it was a reckoning that the monster they feared was never one of them. And in the archives of the Pennsylvania State Lab, a single page closed the case file. Vanessa Cole, identified offender Henry Monroe, deceased 2016. He was never questioned, never arrested, never named while he lived. But his DNA, preserved by accident, discovered by persistence, did what 1,000 searches could not. It gave the ghost of Willow Creek a face. 41 years later, the truth stepped out of the dark, and it looked nothing like anyone expected. Willow Creek, present day. The wind moves through the park the way it used to through the maple trees on prom night, but now there's a new plaque in front of the community hall, stainless steel, polished, engraved with one sentence. Prom night never forgotten, 1982 to 2023. People stop there at dusk. Some leave flowers, some The same week, the county board voted to renew funding for cold case units across Pennsylvania. A small resolution, but a loud one. County Resolution 2023-17. Cold case funding renewed. It guaranteed that no piece of evidence that survives would ever be left unopened again. The sheriff thanked the forensic genealogy team, the archivists who protected the evidence, and the volunteers who petitioned for retesting. Then he added one last sentence. Science solved this case, but community persistence made it possible. And finally, after 40 years, 3 names were cleared. Jake Mallory, Pastor Alan Riggs, Eddie E. Kramer. Each one once treated as the villain of Willow Creek. The sheriff said it plainly. Procedural mistakes and public pressure derailed the truth. But it was never done out of malice. Jake returned to town once, briefly, to stand by the Riverwalk where a new sign now hangs. Vanessa's Walk. He didn't speak to anyone, just left a single white lily and drove away. Pastor Riggs continued to preach, but that Sunday he spoke only about forgiveness. And Eddie Kramer, older now, was seen at the memorial in silence. No one crossed the street to avoid him anymore. The case became more than a solved mystery. It became a blueprint. Investigators wrote new protocols from it. Every statement must be time-stamped. Every piece of evidence logged under climate control. Every maintenance or security worker documented for every public event. And every unsolved file revisited when technology advances. The phrase painted across the county office wall now reads, Timeline, Evidence, Independent Review. For the people of Willow Creek, the story of Vanessa Cole is now taught in classrooms. The high school that crowned her prom queen offers a new elective, forensics and civic literacy. Students study her case not for its tragedy, but for its lessons, to show how truth demands patience and record-keeping. A podcast titled Willow Creek Remembers, released. Every submission begins with one word, INF. followed by date, location, and description. Only verified material will be reviewed. No rumors, no theories, just facts. The final press conference ended without applause. The sheriff read one line that summed it all up. Justice came late, but it came, and it silenced the noise that nearly buried the truth. That night, the lights of the new community hall flickered. This time intentionally. They run on a timer now, checked every week. The town learned that small systems matter as much as big breakthroughs. Willow Creek stands quieter these days. Not empty, just steadier. The case that once divided it now holds it together. And somewhere between the sound of the river and the hum of the street lights, her name stays, carved in steel, carried in memory. Vanessa Cole, 1963 to 1982. The girl who walked out of prom night and never came back. Until the truth did. If you once lived around Willow Creek or Sacramento Valley in the early 80s, if you still have photos, ticket stubs, or journals, share them. Start your message with INFO and tell us what you know. Every verified story helps another family get their answer. Follow the series Cold Case Reopen, Willow Creek, for upcoming cases now under DNA review. Send this video to someone who might remember. Sometimes memory is the last witness. Justice came late, but it came, and it still needs your eyes.